Welcome to the North Houston Space Society meeting for the month of May. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. I'm Nathan Price, founder and president of the North Houston Space Society. During the day, I work for a software company, but all other times I'm working on space exploration. I am a Space Hero Insider, a volunteer at Space Center Houston, and I'll have Masha say a little bit about herself. She's my co-host.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here, everybody. And I'm an architect, an aerospace architect. And for volunteer, I do have some activities at Space Architecture Technical Committee as in educational subcommittee, and I'm judge for NASA's Deep Space Food Challenge.
Well, it sounds good. We have a full agenda lined up.
So can you hear me? I think my connection is not stable.
It was kind of slowed down a little bit, but then got caught up. Why don't you try saying something? Let's see. It looks like it might be frozen.
Can you hear me?
A little bit. It seems to not be a good connection. You want to say something again? It's like you're muted. Okay. Well, Masa, let us know if your connection gets better.
I think I clicked another one. I hope this works better. Sorry.
Well, good deal. You want to go ahead and give us a rundown on the agenda then?
Yeah, sure. So today, this is our first time that we're doing it together with Nathan. It's so exciting. So after our intro, we have recent space news from Dr. Greg Stanley. It is the most exciting part, except the host. And then we will have China's space program. I'm super excited about that one, especially with China's recent launch with Ben Huset. And then after that, we have Q&A, and then we're going to share opinion and experience what we have in the past month, and then we have the end of the meeting, hopefully by 4. Thank you.
Excellent. And before we get all of that, we should talk a little bit about why we're here.
Yeah, so this is one of the exciting parts, because lots of people ask, what should we expand the humanity into the galaxies and go to the moon or Mars while we can save the Earth with that money? Well, there's no right or wrong answer to that question, I think, and we believe that one cannot move forward without the other one. The technology that has been developed and invented for the space missions that can easily use for Earth, and that can improve the human sustainability on Earth.
And the National Space Society, also known as NSS, is an international organization that exists to promote humans' exploration to space. And the NSS vision is people living and working in thriving communities beyond the Earth, and the use of the vast resources of space for dramatic betterment of all of humanity.
It's not showing the content of this slide for some reason, Nathan.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. It's showing up. Okay. And so how does Northeastern Space Society is going to help? We try to educate citizens in Northeastern Space Society about what is going on in space exploration and development, and we try our best to inspire you people who are in this meeting about the abundant and a future we can have. Also, we try our best to encourage students who are in the meeting to be more enthusiastic about the explorations of this space and the careers in space exploration. We hope we can help parents and teachers to see that our future in space will ultimately be bigger than our history, obviously, here on Earth. And we're hopefully that we can open the eyes of investors to potential space businesses. And at the end, we hopefully are trying our best to connect space exploration enthusiasts together for fun and for community.
And the North Houston Space Society can be a key part into connecting you to that group of people. We help to keep you informed and help you keep you engaged, and everyone is welcome to our meetings. And we will be planning more events and activities in the future, especially as the COVID vaccine makes its way through the Houston area and we're able to meet more in person. To ensure that you don't miss out, be sure and bookmark our website, northhoustonspace.org. There you can find our pages and links on Facebook, LinkedIn, Meetup, and other social platforms. Also, I encourage you to sign up for a mailing list and then join the National Space Society. This is a key step to connect with others that share the vision of humanity taking steps into space, and you can play an important role in educating and inspiring our communities about the benefits of humanity branching out.
So this meeting is being recorded and you can access it later on YouTube or on main page or Facebook and other platforms.
Let me review some of the basics of Zoom. In the bottom left, there's an icon to turn on and off your video. It'd probably be nicer to have your video on, so it feels more like we're in person. Also, you can mute and unmute yourself. At times throughout the meeting, we'll turn off this capability for everybody except for the co-host, just to ensure that we have a meeting that's enjoyable for everybody. Towards the end of certain sessions, when we open up for Q&A, we'll allow for you to unmute yourself. And that could be done using that button. You can also use the chat button to communicate with everybody else that's here. So that could be a good way to ask questions, or to make comments and observations, or to exchange contact information if you all want to kind of connect outside of the meeting. When we do have a Q&A session, it's very difficult sometimes for people to know who should talk. You have these situations where 3 people start talking at the same time and they're all silent, then to talk again. There's an easy way around this, and we have the hands up button that will allow for you to raise your hand and put you into a queue, and then Masa and I can call on you. That way we avoid any type of issues with people speaking over each other.
Okay, let me introduce you, Dr. Greg Stanley, who will give us the update about space news since our last meeting. Dr. Greg Stanley, I'm not going to use the word mostly retired. He is the most active member of our community. He creates, develops, and manages innovative technology, especially based on artificial intelligence. He has PhD in chemical engineering from Northwestern University, undergrad or bachelor's in chemical engineering from Purdue University, and he has published over 25 peer-reviewed technical papers. They're really amazing. I really encourage you to read them on ResearchGate and other platforms. He worked on different projects and variety of companies, including Exxon, Gensam, AT&T, Intelsat, Biosphere 2, and Japanese nuclear industry and government consortium, and integration objects and DMC2. And he is our precious North Houston Space Society's Vice President.
Well, Greg, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, is the screen visible here? I'll take that as a yes. Okay, well, we're talking about the space news from about the last month. This is May 1st, and it's going to cover quite a bit on the moon and Mars, because that's where most of the activity has been recently. Get right to Mars here. Of course, NASA has put up the Perseverance rover, and which in turn dropped off the Ingenuity helicopter, shown here in a mosaic photo put together from it, 62 actual shots. Rover itself isn't doing a whole lot except for one major experiment. It has successfully generated oxygen by removing CO2 from the Martian atmosphere. Its atmosphere is mostly CO2. This is really the first in situ resource demo there's been, which is going to really be a key to settling, certainly, other planets or other bodies, even like the moon. They ran it for about an hour. They produced 5 grams of oxygen, which is good for about 10 minutes of breathing. So they're showing that, there are going to be ways to survive in hostile environments like Mars. Now, the first month has been pretty much dedicated to the helicopter called Ingenuity, mostly waiting around, photographing it, relaying the data. It turns out that's actually a fairly large part of its bandwidth and computing power, just managing that data. So it hasn't done a whole lot else other than keeping an eye on the helicopter. So from the landing site, it moved around a bit. It identified that this particular area shown in the blue dots would be a good flight zone in the landing field specifically for the Mars helicopter right here. And then it moved off to a safe distance, and it's moved around a little bit in the last few days, but it's still basically watching the helicopter. And of course, we had the first successful launch of any kind of aircraft, powered flight under control on another planet or another foreign body. There was actually a software glitch that showed up right away, where the rotor starts spinning, and then they're supposed to shift over to a flight mode. And sometimes it doesn't quite complete on time, and there's a timeout that hits, and then the whole thing shuts down. And after spending a long time looking at it, they decided rather than any kind of software fix, they would just change the command sequence and accept about a 15% risk of there being a timeout. So then they ran the flight. The first one rose up 10 feet. That was the very first flight. This picture you're looking at is looking down at the shadow of itself, looking down from the helicopter. So that was really quite a historic first. The second flight went up higher, about 16 feet, and moved around a little bit. One side comment here, what sets the altitude? You might think it's something to do with the atmosphere, but actually it's due to limitations of the instrumentation. They have a laser rangefinder that they use as an altimeter, and they were worried that it might not work. So somewhere between 16 and 33 feet is probably going to be about as high as this particular helicopter will go. Now, flights 3 and 4 started to get a whole lot more interesting. This is a case where they take off from their area, they fly around and come back. Flight 3 went up 16 feet and flew about 330 feet totally, and it went at a top speed of about 4.5 miles per hour. Flight 4 had the same timeout problem, but when they ran it again, they had the longest flight yet, 117 seconds, and they flew 872 feet, and they went as fast as 8 miles per hour. Now, it takes a while for all the images and sound to get transmitted from the helicopter back to the rover, and then from the rover through the satellites on back to Earth. So we will probably get more images and even more sound from this later. And a side comment on the speed. The upper speed is not really limited by aerodynamics. It's actually limited by computing power on the helicopter, because as you recall from this slide from last time, the helicopter takes snapshots along its flight path as a way to correct its inertial navigation. And it takes time to do that processing. And that's about as fast as they're not sure exactly what that speed is, but they're not going to go so fast that they go faster than the images can be analyzed. So these were very successful flights. This has really turned out much better than almost anybody could hope for. They were allocated 1 month originally, and the assumption was they would just leave the helicopter behind, and Perseverance would go on with its main mission, which is related to science of finding previous life on Mars. So that was considered a technology demonstration, and it was successfully completed. There'd be one more flight, which would be a one-way trip to a new flight zone. But now they've been given an extension on life for a minimum of 30 days, 30 sols, which is a Martian day, which is 40 minutes longer than an Earth day. Now they're going to show that it could be useful as an aerial scout, and that could go on possibly until August. It remains to be seen. They won't fly as often, because the Perseverance really does need to get going with all of its science tasks. And as I'd mentioned before, just relaying all that video and data from the helicopter was taking a significant portion of the the network bandwidth and the computing power of Perseverance. And one back-end limitation is around mid-October, Mars and Earth are on the opposite sides of the sun, and there's no communications path. So they want to get a lot of the science done before then. And that's part of what's driving the urgency of getting going with the rest of the Perseverance rover experience. On to the moon. Both human and robotic landing plans have had significant things go on. Let's talk about the biggest one right here, and that's related to NASA's Artemis program for putting humans back on the moon permanently. There was a contract for the Lunar lander, which is what would take astronauts down to the surface of the moon. The original plan had been with 3 vendors, and then they narrowed it. They were going to narrow it down to 2. That should have happened earlier this year, but did not. But then all of a sudden, surprisingly, to everybody's surprise, a single vendor was selected. And when you get down to it, this was really forced by the budget limits that Congress had imposed on the human landing system. It turned out only one vendor could actually meet that. Unfortunately, it's already been suspended. That just news about that just came out this morning. There have been protests filed, which we knew about, but the Government Accountability Office is now going to investigate it, and there's going to be all kinds of litigation going on. And until that's all resolved, payments will be suspended. NASA is not going to be allowed to even meet with the winner of this. So the 2024 landing date, for a day there was looking like, well, maybe it's going to be possible again. Now it's looking a lot less likely. So who are the 3 contenders? Well, there was a team led by Blue Origin, partnered with Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman. There's a team led by Dynetics, and there was a SpaceX. Now these are more or less to scale. You can see if you look closely, there's the astronauts are all about the same size at the bottom of these photographs here. So you can see there's quite a difference in the scale of the solutions here. SpaceX, of course, in this case, was providing a variant of their Starship. It's slightly different, no fins, for instance. You don't need them if you're landing on the moon. There's no atmosphere. So anyway, the contract initially was awarded to SpaceX, and as for a derivative of Starship. And it was at a bargain price, $2.89 billion, as a fixed price contract. They were going to get 2 missions. The first one is a test flight to land without any astronauts, and then the second flight would carry a crew to the moon's south pole. And of course, SpaceX would continue investing its own money. They had originally said the Starship development was going to be in the $5 billion something range. And so the $2.89 billion is cheaper than their total cost. So SpaceX is continuing to invest its own money in this. So the way this would work, that NASA would get the astronauts to the moon, is in several stages. First, Starship would get up to lunar orbit. Now to get there and have enough fuel to make it back, down to the surface and back, they actually have to refuel in Earth orbit. I'll talk more about that later. Next, the astronauts would fly on the Space Launch System, which is the other main competitor for heavy-duty liftoff. They will go to lunar orbit in the Orion capsule, which has been, along with SLS, has been the primary effort so far. The astronauts would then transfer to Starship. They'd go down and land, spend a week, come back up to the Orion, and then on back to Earth. At the Gateway, which had been proposed, that had been out of the plans for a while. That was going to be something that came later. The Gateway was a lunar orbiter, and the idea is it's a place for storage of supplies and meeting and so on. But anyway, that was already out of the picture for the very first flight. So finally, Orion would return to Earth and would splash down with parachutes. That's the plan. Now, there are some hurdles involved in getting Starship to the moon for this job. The first one, of course, is finishing Starship, the upper stage in particular. It would need its full array of 6 engines. The tests they've been doing so far are only with 3. And of course, they haven't reached orbit yet. So when they have more engines, they would be able to reach orbit or even beyond, just with Starship. And along with that, though, there is the booster that's needed. That's called the Super Heavy. We had the heavy, but now we have the Super Heavy, and that has not been tested yet. So that has to be developed, but it's using the same engines, and it would be reusable as would be all of the other SpaceX rockets. Just for a size comparison, it would have about twice the power of the Saturn V that was used for Apollo. And as I mentioned, this will require refueling in Earth orbit. They use liquid oxygen and methane as their cryogenic fuels. This is kind of a big deal that really had not been allowed before. Of course, landing on the moon is its own challenge. They haven't quite gotten landing on Earth down just yet, but they're working on that. They've already had plenty of tests with spectacular results in more than one way, unfortunately. But it turns out, really, when you get down to it, the biggest single issue is really not technical, it's political. The competitors, of course, are outraged, because they lost. Nobody likes to lose. So both Blue Origin and Dynetics have already filed protests, and the project, unfortunately, has stopped pending the review, as I mentioned. The reason they're fighting over this is that the implications are huge. This is really a big deal. It's kind of a radical departure for deep space activities for NASA. It says that NASA was really now buying into in-orbit refueling, reusability, which wasn't really a factor in previous deep space efforts, and really large-scale transport of people and cargo. The previous goals were to get a couple of people here and there. This really allows the possibility of a much larger scale presence on the moon, and probably a shorter time ultimately to getting to Mars, since we're using the same rockets. So it certainly would solidify the SpaceX position, and obviously does provide funding for Starship. So not only do you get the seal of approval from NASA, but you also get funding. So, and again, not just for the moon, but since the same vessel, essentially the same ship, would be used for Mars, they're kind of buying into the Mars program as well. It just it makes it a whole lot easier. But SpaceX gets something in return as well. NASA has spent a lot more time out in space, and they know a lot more about life support and also power, including nuclear power, which ultimately you're probably going to need for deep space and Mars missions. Longer term, the real implications are that it could hasten the end of the SLS lifter, the Orion capsule, and the Gateway orbiter. And you think about why. Well, Boeing is building one throwaway rocket a year for about $2 billion each for delivering a couple of astronauts, and they're 5 years late. You compare that to SpaceX, that they're already building rockets on a monthly basis, including Starship, where they're running monthly flight tests. So they're going to, eventually there would be the question, why not just launch humans from Earth on Starship? And it's that inevitability that's kind of scaring everybody who's not SpaceX right now. But the politics, as I said, will be the trickiest part. There's a lot of vested interests. All these programs for SLS, Orion, and Gateway were really kind of viewed as jobs programs in a very large number of states, and of course the aerospace companies as well. And that's, that can't be ignored. That's a major factor in the way we fund our space program. It also affects foreign partnerships. Foreign partners have been building modules for the Gateway, and if that's not even needed, how happy are they going to be? And there's a little bit of an unknown with the new NASA administrator. He was a big supporter of SLS, and he had a lot of friends in the traditional aerospace business. So it's not really clear how all this will shake out. Okay, in other lunar news, the robotic landings. Of course, there are several robotic landings coming up. Various companies, including Intuitive Machines out of Houston and Astrobotic out of Pittsburgh. In the case of Astrobotic, they've also picked the SpaceX, the Falcon Heavy, not the Super Heavy, just the Heavy as the rocket for them to get there to the moon in 2023. Now that is part of the Commercial Lunar Payload Services program that NASA has. It was about a $200 million contract. They'll be delivering a 950-pound rover from NASA to the moon's south pole, and that's pictured down below here. I'm not sure why they have ramps going off on both sides. You would think coming off once would be enough, but anyway, they're just probably showing the flexibility. It's kind of interesting that the Falcon Heavy will just pretty much go right into lunar orbit, and then the lander goes down from there. There's no pause for Earth orbits. Some other space updates. Blue Origin. There's actually questions came up about this in recent news, so I thought I'd spend a little more time on them. They have several programs, one of which is a New Shepard booster and what they call the reusable spaceship, which is a passenger capsule that sits on top of that. They're making a lot of progress, and what in fact they're doing, they've announced that on May 5th, people are going to be able to sign up, actually to buy tickets, basically. The teaser, they haven't said how much they'll cost, but you might guess that they might be comparable to what Virgin Galactic would be charging, which is something like $250,000 for a similar ride. I should have said, by the way, that so the booster is reusable. The passenger capsule comes back down with parachutes. So that's how that system works. So what they'll do is they'll take 6 passengers in it at a time. They'll fly up 62 miles, which is kind of regarded as the edge of space. And that's from their launch site in West Texas. The passengers will experience weightlessness for about 3 minutes. Total ride time is about 10 minutes. And there's no pilot involved whatsoever, so it's all fully automated. Now, they really have quite a successful record here. Out of 15 test launches they've done, all of them worked. Some of them have carried payloads for NASA or others, small ones where they only needed a short time in space, but they wanted some of that time. There was a test on April 14th that included rehearsing getting people on and off of the passenger capsule, but they still have not sent an actual passenger yet. That may come fairly soon. Before they sell tickets, they're going to have to actually demo somebody traveling on there. Now, what about their other efforts? Well, the next thing up is the New Glenn rocket, and that would be to go to orbit. And unfortunately, that's not going to be available until probably late 2022 is what they're saying right now, which actually caused a problem, of course, for Jeff Bezos's other project, which is the Kuiper project for providing another internet constellation competing with Starlink. That means he has to buy launches on other rockets, in this case from the United Launch Alliance. And they announced purchasing, I forget, 9 or 10 of the initial rides. These pictures here show their launch site in West Texas, and this was the most recent test launch. Some other smaller news, Northrop Grumman, we've talked about them before. They have these, what they're calling mission extension vehicles, that their goal is to get up to the satellites that are way up in geosynchronous orbit. Typically, they last for a while, but they run out of propellant for maintaining their exact position in orbit. So they go up there and they move them around and keep them going. And they've done that before in MEV-1, and they've just done it again with their second one. They captured a 17-year-old satellite. They latched onto it while it was actually operating. They never shut it down, and they managed to do that successfully. That's the last in this series. Their future plans are to have robotic arms to do repairs or upgrades of satellites. And for these kind of missions where they want to add new propulsion capabilities to old satellites, their plan is to install them out as a pod and then just move on and do other things, including assembling things in space. This effort is funded by DARPA. Not all space funding, of course, is done by NASA. DARPA is a Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency who typically funded a lot of the really fundamental research that got us things like the internet and really kicked off autonomous driving. They've really had a major technology impact over the years. The space station has been quite busy. We've launched 3 astronauts from Russia and 4 from the United States on the Falcon 9. Interestingly, we're not even allowed to purchase any more flights to the space station from Russia. However, it turns out, I hadn't realized this until recently, cross-training is not really complete between the Russian and the American parts of the space station. So not everybody knows how to do everything. There's certain things that only the Americans can do and certain things only the Russians can do. And just to be sure that there's always somebody from Russia and somebody from America on the same space station, they've come to the conclusion that they need to trade seats. So we're not going to pay Russia anymore, but one American did go up on their latest Soyuz mission to the space station, and then they'll get a seat, on one of ours coming up next year. In fact, right now there's a huge number of people on the space station that's shown in the picture right here because they've had some bad weather and they haven't been able to do the return of the most recent mission. A real brief talk on the Chinese missions. I'll be brief because, of course, we have a whole guest speaker to talk more about this. But the Mars rover landing by China, it was still on schedule for mid-May. They never announced an exact date for it. But they've been quite active. They've also launched the core module for their space station. Unfortunately, the rocket that got it up there is going to tumble uncontrolled, probably within the next week. Coming in uncontrolled means that it could hit, places where the people live. It's not necessarily just falling in the ocean like you hope. It's generally considered bad form besides bad economics to do that. So that's about the only embarrassing part of this mission. Otherwise, it was quite successful. And they'll have about 10 more launches to go for completion. That includes that, visits by astronauts, cargo, and so on. Their other major project is the International Lunar Research Station. Well, make no mistake, it is really, China is the top dog in that, but Russia is a major player. And now they've decided to formally invite other countries. So they're trying to get international participation as well. In other space news, everybody probably knows this, but Bill Nelson was confirmed as the next administrator for NASA by unanimous consent. So now we get to this part of the meeting where people get, how many launches have there been since the last meeting, which was April 3rd. So it's almost a month, not quite. And as we said before, it doesn't count suborbital launches. So for instance, this picture that we have up here of the Blue Origin launch, that one doesn't count because they weren't trying to go as far as in orbit or beyond. So everybody wants to take a quick guess? I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, so let's see, it looks like a few people said less than 5 flights. People guessed 7 or 8, 9, 10, and 11, more or less equal percentages on that. No, I'd say that was pretty close. So it turns out the answer is 10. And we've already talked about a lot of these. Of course, this SpaceX is back to putting up Starlink satellites. They had several batches of those. A side comment about that, once they get Starship going, instead of putting up 60 satellites at a time, they'll be able to do 400. So they have a lot of interest in getting Starship going as soon as possible. We'd already mentioned, of course, the astronauts being launched by Russia and the United States for the space station. There was a big US spy satellite that went up using one of the last of the Delta IV Heavy boosters. There's only 3 of those left. And let's see, we talked about the core module for the Chinese space station. So that pretty much covers the news. I'll just close with paraphrasing Elon Musk that, you don't want to be one of those species that just is stuck on a single planet. We want to be a multi-planet species, and that kind of sums up my attitude. We could probably take a few minutes for questions if we want, but then we need to move on to the main speaker.
Yeah, it sounds good. I've made it so people can unmute themselves. If you have a question, I suggest just raising your hand and we could call on you, or you can put it in the chat room. One thing I would like to say, Greg, it looks like Elon Musk was wrong about one thing. Some people probably argue more, but I remember him saying at one point that he thought it'd be easier to actually land a rocket on the moon than to convince NASA that he could. So it looks like he was able to convince them without actually doing it. So.
Yeah, it may be convincing the politicians. It may be the tougher one.
Yes.
I got a quick question.
Yep.
Greg, hi.
Hi.
The Starship is huge, and I think the answer is already yes. They have an elevator in that ship or some other type of transport?
They do. It's about a 15-story elevator that's included as part of that. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems kind of cumbersome getting up and down around that ship.
Yeah.
Considering the environment that they've settled in.
Yeah.
I know.
I mean, they would face the same thing on Mars too. So wherever they land, they're landing upright. So they're gonna, they do need an elevator, and I'm sure it's powered. I don't think they're gonna make it.
Oh, you've seen the movie Ad Astra, probably. Do you see any similarity between that ship that went to that blasted off from Mars to the
which movie?
What's that?
Which movie?
Ad Astra.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Do you see a similar that ship and the Starship?
Yeah, I'm kind of drawing a blank. I can't quite visualize what it was even. Sorry.
Hey, Greg, on your inevitable question on the.
I'm sorry, I believe I said, is there any similarity between that ship and the Starship?
Oh yeah, I said I'm not really sure because I don't remember much about that rocket actually. Sorry.
Yeah, hey, Greg, on your inevitable question on the lunar landing architecture, it seems a corollary to that question might be why not launch crew on the Crew Dragon, which is already human certified for launch
Yeah.
from Earth to low Earth orbit.
Yeah,
Instead of
yeah,
having,
that's all.
instead of,
That's exactly.
yeah, instead of having to try to human rate the Starship that soon for Earth to low Earth orbit launch.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, well, I think we probably need to move on to our featured speaker, Ben Huset. He's been a lifelong promoter of space travel and space technology. I won't go through all the things he's been involved in, but it has included National Space Society. In his day job, he's worked for decades in IT, including for NASA and FAA contractors, and his original degree is in computer science. And he's going to talk about China and space, starting from actually Chinese folklore. In fact, I guess all their stuff is named after Chinese folklore. I'll turn it over to Ben.
Okay. Okay, I'm not. Is the screen coming up? I
Yes.
need one more thing here. Okay. So I'm. Okay. China in space from Wuhan to Tianwen. First off, I want to say I'm not a native Chinese speaker. In fact, I'm really bad at it. I saw a couple people based on their screen names looks like they might be, so please, apologies for the mispronunciations. But while I do know a couple people who are fluent, I could not get them to participate at this meeting today, a trick that I actually have done in presentations past. I'm Ben Huset, and I'm currently a board officer with the Minnesota chapter of the National Space Society and past president of the local astronomy club, Minnesota Astronomical, and have participated in several Mars Society, MDRS missions out in Utah, and have worked for the FAA and other NASA contractors. So I do want to thank the North Houston Space Society for inviting me here today. China in space? If you're like most people that I hang out with, the word China in space in the same sentence really didn't occur. It was mostly a US or a Soviet in space. So it wasn't really until 2002 when the show Firefly sort of at least got me thinking along those lines. But amazingly, none of the main screen characters were Asian in origin. Anyway, if you're not familiar with Firefly, if you like space westerns, it's a good thing. I encourage you to check it out. If you really want an adventure, try watching it out at MDRS, where you're in the desert in a mock spaceship. So it's kind of cool. Give me a moment here to bring back my screen. Which one am I missing? I'm missing that. So we're going to talk about China in the past, in the present, and a little bit about what they could be doing in the future. So in the past, the Chinese, a long time ago, some things say 180, other sources say around 900 to 1000 AD. They became quite proficient with gunpowder and fireworks and its use in military endeavors. Some rocket-propelled arrows and other things like that, or some arrow-propelled bombs. All sorts of really, if you're on the receiving end, nasty things. In Battle of 1232, Siege of Haifeng, or as it was called at the time, Van Hejing, which is right after Khan had died. His successor had a battle with the Jin over control of the town, and it was a months-long siege, and the Mongols eventually did win the day. But both sides, although it was mostly the Jin who had explosives in trebuchets and what they're called fire lances, which basically means you strap a Roman candle onto the end of a lance and brandish that about. Of course, this was reenacted in classic Star Trek, in which Captain Kirk was able to find some local sulfur, some coal, some potassium nitrate, and some diamonds to use as projectiles, and of course the bamboo tube to win the day. Around 1500, there was a person by the name of Wan Hu, who was an artist, a politician, an explorer, and he thought that, well, let's see, if I take a chair and some kites and some fire arrows, I might be able to go up and explore the heavens. So he had his assistant light the thing, and of course the assistant very wisely ran away, and there was a big cloud of smoke and a big boom, and Wan Hu was gone. And no one really knows exactly what happened, but there is a lunar lunar crater named after him, pictured here. Of course, the father of modern Chinese rocketry, Quan Susen, and he was born in China back in 1911. He left China to go study at MIT, and he got a master's in science in 1935, and then he was recruited to do his doctoral work at Caltech in 1936, which he did. He helped found JPL, which does really cool things like flying helicopters on Mars, and he got his PhD in engineering there. And then after he graduated, he was recruited into the Manhattan Project, which was America's effort to build the first atomic bomb. After that, he was sort of drafted into the Army and made a colonel, and he was one of the, and he was on the team that was sent into Germany to go triage German scientists and figure out who was worth saving and bringing back to the U.S. So he worked with von Braun. In 1947, he married a nationalist Chinese general's daughter, and in 1949 he applied to become a U.S. Citizen. And if you look at the bottom of most of my slides, I've got a URL with more info on any particular topic of that slide. Of course, this was in the middle of the McCarthy era, in which communists were seen everywhere. In June 6th of 1950, over the objection of his co-workers and managers, the FBI pulled his security clearance and was put under house arrest. After 5 years, he was deported and swapped for 11 U.S. pilots that were shot down during the Korean War, and went to China. Upon arrival, they said, well, what have you done? And he said, well, I made A-bombs for the Americans. He said, do you want to make some A-bombs for us? And he said, okay. They said, what else do you know? I said, well, I know how to make B-2 rockets. And he said, cool, can you do that for us too? So he was put on that committee as well. And in the late 50s, the Soviets and the Chinese signed in a agreement in which the Soviets would teach the Chinese how to put together and build and all launch some of the V2 rockets that the Soviets had obtained as spoils of war from Germany. And in September of 60, they launched the Russian copy of the V2 that they'd gotten from the Soviets. And a couple months later, they launched their own copy of a V2. And things moved along. And of course, in 64, he was on the team of Project 596, which set off the first Chinese atomic bomb. I'm gonna let that one go to voicemail. Of course, 66 was a very, shall we say, exciting time in China, in which there was what was called the Cultural Revolution, and people who were really good at science and education were kind of poo-pooed, sort of like what we just went through here, but more so, because if you appeared too smart and stuff, they actually either sent you out to be re-educated, or if you complained about it, they killed you. So not a good time. But he was put on the list of people, don't mess with him. He's doing good stuff for the States. So he was a couple months after that, he helped launch the first ICBM with an atomic warhead for China. And a couple months after that, he helped set off the first hydrogen bomb for China. So, thanks to McCarthy and his friends, we gave China what the McCarthy people feared the most. Of course, he went on, he founded the Spaceflight Medical Research Center for China, and helped launch the first Chinese satellite in 1970. And he said, we really should have a crewed program, and here's some dinosaur type work that I did for the Americans. Maybe we can still do that. So, of course, he was, of course, appropriately awarded for his contributions to the Chinese state. And he got to watch on TV, as well as the rest of the Chinese, as well as the rest of the world, China's first crewed space flight in 2003, which is when I started doing this talk. As a coincidence, his nephew had been awarded in 2008 the Nobel Prize for chemistry. So, and sadly, he passed away in 2009. And you can see him here with his wife and the then premier upon retirement. So, anyway, if you watch this TV show, The Expanse, one of the ships in the series, specifically in season 3, episode 10 and 11, was named after him. So, kind of cool and interesting. If you're not watching The Expanse, why aren't you? It's really good stuff. I encourage you to track it down. Of course, you know, as I said before, you know, they built the Soviet copy of a German V2 rocket and launched it back in 1960, and launched the first orbiting satellite in 1970, about a meter in diameter. And it played a recording of The East is Red, proclaiming the glories of leadership under Chairman Mao, on 20.009 megahertz for all to hear. The satellite ran for about 2 weeks on batteries, and the batteries died out. But the satellite is still up there, just like our first Explorer 1 satellite. They launched it way up there with an apogee of well over 2,000 kilometers, and it's still up there. So, and it's about a 3.5 magnitude object. So if you want to look that up, you can, and see it go overhead still to this day. They continued to develop launch capabilities, and they thought, well, it'd be good to get some stuff back. So they developed a capsule that was initially for reconnaissance purposes, for military, but as well as weather and geographical and other spatial things. First launch of that was in '75. They had they were looking at into crew rating it, but it never actually flew with a person on board. Had 26 flights, last launched in 2006, and it was kind of unique in that we have all the high tech tiles or the impregnated epoxy resin stuff, and they just went out and got a hunk of oak tree and carved it into the right shape, and it was 2 feet thick, and they knew that in 20 minutes of reentry you aren't going to burn through 2 feet of oak in 20 minutes. So it worked for them. It was a very nice low-tech solution for a high-tech problem, I thought. They were working on a crewed program. The program ran from '66 through 1980, and they were trying to get the first flight around 1973. Unfortunately, in May of '72, there was an attempted coup to overthrow Mao, and that didn't work out so well for the people who were planning the coup. Sort of like what happened at our Capitol earlier this year, and everybody associated with the program was kicked out, and unfortunately, with some of the leaders of this project 714, so that program got shelved. Okay, so more towards current days. Time magazine back in December of '68, had this cover about the race of the Soviets and Americans to the moon, and in July of 2019, they said, well, it's more of an economic race now, but with the players being China and SpaceX and Blue Origin and several other small upstarts around the world. Of course, China has always been had a very positive attitude in space as far as what they say. Unfortunately, like most space programs, though, they really do underfund it, and they say they're all for the peaceful exploration of outer space and development. And if you go to their website down here, you can read the entire white paper. It's only a couple pages long. There is the notes should be posted on the Houston website, and encourage you to, there will be a PDF version of this presentation, so you don't feel you have to write down all of the URLs. So it'll be available for you afterwards. Of course, NORAD is keeping track of everything up there, everything bigger than a pop can. That's a limitation of the hardware. It's the L radar at that wavelength just can't see things that are smaller than that. As of about midnight last night, when I last checked, they had 455 payloads up there, 179 rocket boosters, and we heard in the space news about the booster for their space station not doing a re-entry burn, and it's going to fall somewhere from 42 degrees north to 42 degrees south, and we'll see where it lands. There's over 3,000 pieces of various flotsam and jetsam out there that's still up there that came from Chinese space program, and they've had over 1,400 pieces of things that have re-entered and are no longer up there. And so from 2000 to 2018, the Chinese have been working at increasing their number of launches and market share. You can see there's the part of this graph that's in red. The U.S. is in blue, and the Russians are in the purple there. So they've sort of been diminishing and not launching as much. I know back in the 60s through the 80s, they were the person to go see for a launch, primarily due to the fact that their satellites do not survive this long up in space unless they need to replenish them more often. So that's why they had a high launch rate. That now that they've got satellites that last longer, they reduce their launch rates. And in 2020, just last year, you can see that the Chinese put up a respectable 39 launches, 39 of which were successful. The US put up 44, of which 40 were successful, so they both had four bad days each. And Russia is a distant third at 17, but they were batting 1,000, so. Come on, there you go. What are they all launching? Well, you can see right now a previously flown Falcon is the most common thing being flown out there, as well as a few new Falcons. And the Chinese are doing a Long March 2s and 3s and stuff like that. So plus some also Irans, so by other countries. So who's doing all this launching? Well, there's the Chinese National Space Administration, and you can sort of think of that as the Chinese equivalent of NASA. It's a government state-run organization, and they pretty much do the same stuff that NASA does, and they set policies and directives and stuff like that. And in 2019, they called the administrator of this program one of the 100 most influential people of 2019. There's also the China Academy of Launch Vehicle Technology. Think of them as sort of like a private contractor like Boeing or a Lockheed or something. They build hardware and rockets. But, you know, they build for the Chinese military as well. So in 2020, the Trump administration said, we don't want people who have anything to do with calls involved with U.S. things. So they were put on the naughty list. We'll see what Biden does about that, if he keeps them on that list or takes them off. We'll see. There's the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. They're another tech firm that they build hardware. They've got labs scattered across the country, and they build things. And they've been involved in the crewed Senchu program, the lunar exploration, and the GPS and Mars exploration, as well as the Chinese space station. So they build a lot of good hardware for them. Come on. And this is their chairman. Very similar acronym, but different corporation, CASC. Once again, large corporation that's state managed, and they do the R&D and manufacturing and stuff like that. So it's having a state-run or in state direct isn't quite the same as what we have here in the U.S., especially now with our space commercialization. But think of it like what it was like, you know, back in the 70s, for, you know, in which Boeing could build or Lockheed could build rockets for NASA or DoD, but that was about it. They couldn't do much else. And of course, if you, as a U.S. citizen or some other company that's not part of China, and you want China to do something for you, you call these guys, the Great Wall, the China Great Wall Industry Corporation, and they'll help walk you through all the paperwork and clearances necessary to get the Chinese to do something for you. So if you want PR and marketing stuff, that's where you go. They have all sorts of good stuff for that sort of thing. And they work as marketing, international marketing for these companies. Okay, of course, People's Liberation Army rocket force does have an, nuclear deterrent ICBM force, and they have proven that, yeah, they can shoot down a satellite if they're so inclined. Back in 2007, they purposely launched and destroyed one of their old weather satellites. Of course, it was in a polar orbit, the way many weather satellites are, and it's really high up, 500 some miles, and thus the debris up there, to see a debris cloud from the collision frame, which is getting to be a very interesting thing you try to avoid. And of course, there's been much public outcry, so making more space debris is not a good thing. They kind of did it quite a bit for this one test. But of course, the Soviets and the Americans have done a similar ASAT test, but their targets were in lower orbit and thus decayed much sooner. Okay, where are all these things coming from? Well, when they set up the program back in the 50s, the planners were thinking, well, if we're invaded, they aren't really going to come through. They envisioned a Navy coming up and laying siege and deploying Marines. So they did their best not to have their launch assets next to the coast, and they purposely picked places greatly inland. So, like, for the same reason that NORAD SAC is located in Omaha, Nebraska, trying to make it hard to get to from the borders by land. Saigon, was codenamed Time Base 20, is out in the Gobi Desert, in which everything that they've all launched that they got back, be it crew or film return or whatever, things have all come out of here. And when they launch their next batch of astronauts later on this summer, they'll be launched out of there. And you see they're at 40 degrees north, so that sort of sets the inclination for their space station. Although their space station was launched out of here, they knew the crew had to come out of here, so they purposely launched in an orbit that could be reached easily by the higher latitude bases. Of course, we've known about this for quite a while, this complex, but unless you had clearances, you really didn't get very many photos of it. This was a classified U.S. spy satellite photos from the Corona program back in '72. And of course, now we don't need that. You can just go to Google Earth and give it a location, and yep, that's the launch complex. See by the shadows here, the very tall buildings here and stuff like that. Or you can go to their website and grab graphics from there. So it's very much a different space program than it was back in the last part of the last century. Of course, they have a vertical assembly building where they put this together, and it's like, wait a minute, I've seen that somewhere else. Where have I seen that somewhere else? Yeah, that's where it was. It's got a big tall building with big doors and little U-shaped arches and a little support building off to the side, but no mountains in the background. So their vertical assembly and testing building very similar to the VAB, but not as tall because their rockets to date haven't been that tall. So it's only 200 some feet tall versus the 526 of the VAB. So, and of course, their mission control is in Beijing, just like our mission control isn't in Florida and hasn't been since the early 60s. So, moving on to the next base. Chang, a bit further south, it's where they launched their geostationary satellites out of, so you don't have to do so much fuel in order to do the plane change. Opened in '84, sort of nestled in the mountains of Sichuan province. It's where they were going to launch their crewed program from, and they got as far as building the viewing bleachers, but then the program got canceled, and thus they have bleachers that look at nothing. But they launched the first 4 lunar probes out of there, and this is also where they did their ASAT test launch from that destroyed their weather satellite. Give me a moment here. I need to find something here. That's not it. Of course, everybody has a bad day from time to time. And in '96, they had theirs at this location. About 22 seconds after all launch, a CZ-2 decided to go horizontal rather than up, and it landed on the nearby village where all the technicians who maintain this place were living. Officially, only 6 people were killed, and 59 were injured. But if you saw the video of what the village looked like afterwards, you kind of think they are sort of lowballing that casualties. They were launching some satellites for the West. The Hughes Intelsat, and of course there was lots of finger pointing afterwards. They claimed that the Hughes satellite caused the crash, and Hughes was saying, "Hey, we were just sitting there. We weren't doing anything." So, but it caused it sort of shut down the program where the Chinese were launching stuff for Western commercial satellites. A bit further north and to the east, there's Taiwan Launch Center. This is where they did their ICBM testing from, and also they did do some launches for the West for the Iridium satellites were out of here as well. So, of course, one thing you might have noticed is that the first 3 sites are quite a ways from the ocean. And of course, when you launch a rocket, usually the first stage doesn't make it to space. It lands somewhere. That's why most of our launch complexes are next to the ocean, and such that the booster can fall into the ocean, and except for some fish, not be really too disturbing. But of course, they were fearful of invasion and moved their bases inland, and thus, when they send up a rocket, it comes down, and you can see it falling here. And of course, no rocket runs itself dry on fuel. That's really bad for engines. You don't want to run it out of gas. And they use hypergolics for a lot of their rockets, and not a good time. And the villagers, of course, come out to say, "Hey, why did my field just blow up?" In fact, they've got a whole department that their job is insurance adjusters, and about a week before I'll launch, they say, in this 4-hour window, please stay indoors and away from windows and stuff, because we're going to launch, and there's a possibility of, in this 20-mile by 5-mile box, you could have an unexpected house guest. So, and they say, "Oh gosh, your barn just blew up." They'll write you a check to compensate you, like that. But it's one of the things that, yeah, China's been doing this for quite a while, and they it's the cost of doing business for them. So far, nobody's been killed, as far as I know, with the exception of that one thing back in '98, in which it crashed into the village shortly after a launch. So China's big. If you want to, see, here's a YouTube link down here. You can, but if you just want to, search for China rocket crash, there's lots of videos of it shot by people's cell phones. Of course, if you're really into rockets, you might recognize the color of this cloud, and it's like, oh yeah, you don't want to breathe that. That's hydrazine and stuff like that. So don't want to do that. So anyway, finally they did say, okay, well, we'll give you a coastal launch site, and initially they were just doing sounding rockets out of it, because, well, if a sounding rocket base is overrun by hostile forces, yeah, we can live with that. But eventually they realized that, hey, we haven't been invaded by sea for a long time. I don't think they're going to do that. So they decided to beef up this installation, and it's now their new launch site for geosynchronous. And it's also where they launched their Mars probe from, and the sample return from the moon from, and it's where they launched their space station just earlier this week from. And just like if you go to Kennedy Space Center, there's a real cool visitor center next to it, and there's a Disney World just a couple miles, just an hour or so down the road. They've got a similar entertainment and visitor complex next to their launch complex down here. So out on YouTube, I saw this week a tour of their visitor complex showing off their new space station mock-up that you can walk through. So it's pretty cool. If you happen to be in Weichang on Hans Haiku Island down here, go check it out. There was one place that they did suborbital launches from, sort of like Wallops Island here in the States. Back in the 60s, they launched some suborbital scientific payloads, including these two dogs on separate flights. So, but there was another casualty of the Cultural Revolution, and the place was basically abandoned after '66. So what are they launching? Well, their first thing, the Long March, or Changzheng rocket, kind of looked like this. They only built 2 of them, and they moved on to the next thing. Right now, they've got a very popular Long March 3, or CZ3 thing that takes, somewhere between 2,600 to 5,000 kilograms all the way out to geotransfer orbit. So similar to the capability of a Falcon 9. So it's very popular. Of course, they have any shape and size to meet your needs. The white and pink ones have been discontinued, but the blues are currently in production. So it's not listed here, but the crew goes up on 2F. It looks very much like a Soviet Russian Soyuz booster, but the strap-ons are a little bit different. So, and of course, just like the U.S. said, hey, we should really let space commercialization take over. So they've now allowed the businesses that were building rockets for the government to just build it for private industry and the international launch market. And they are came into speed on that. So all of these rockets out here are slowly being added to the stable. And as you can see, sort of as they came online, various things, and 2016 is really when it really started to take off. Of course, they can send up an imaging satellite or weather satellites or GPS. They, with the Europeans, have come up with their own GPS system that's independent of the Russians or the US satellite positioning systems. And of course, they do weather satellites both in geosync as well as polar orbiting. But of course, one that everybody wants to know more about is, of course, their crewed vehicle system. Work on that started in earnest back in '92, and they contacted the Soviets at the time and said, "Hey, can we buy some plans and send some of our people there to get trained and stuff like that?" And the Soviets said, "Sure, why not? Give us the money and we can work it out." So the Chinese have come up with their own derivative of the Soyuz spaceship. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit bigger, and the key difference is that the orbital module up here has its own independent power. So when the spaceship breaks apart and the crew comes home in the middle capsule, and the service module re-enters sort of just a little bit downrange of it, the orbital module can continue operating for many months after the crew comes back. And of course, some people are saying, "Well, gosh, that's sounds like a spy satellite or something they have up there." Who knows what they do, but they don't talk about it, so it could be that. So they launch, out of this site here, and they land out in the middle of nowhere in inner Mongolia, because you got to come down, and you're not sure exactly where you're going to be, but within this, a couple miles, square miles. And they got lots of miles out there. So, of course, they have some support tracking ships. The long views, they've built 7 of them. 4 of them are currently still active. You have these large tracking dish antennas to relay telemetry back to China. They also have a geosynchronous TDRS-like satellites that gives it a view about like this. They also have a ground station in southeast or southwestern Africa, and they set up a receiving station also in Chile as well. So if you want to know where these ships are at any one time, you can go to any ship tracking website and key in these IMOs, and it'll tell you when and where they are and what's going on. They also have 2 large cargo ships with built-in cranes to load and unload the rockets, because they're built up the coast, and then they take them down the coast down to have them all launched, sort of the way NASA barges stuff from Michoud over to Kennedy. And they standardly assemble them horizontally and then assemble them vertically. Let's see, pretty much same as what a Soyuz spacecraft. It launches. 4 strap-ons, of course, fall away, and then the shroud, and it goes up, and they do whatever they're going to do. Capsule separates, and the crew come back in the capsule here, but the orbital module can stay up there and do more things for many more days afterwards, but of course it burns up afterwards. So if you have a science experiment on board, you have to be able to radio the results back down. They've been launching these things since '99. They had 4 flights in which were unaccrued but had experiments and test dummies and stuff on. And then in 2003, they finally were able to launch their first crewed individual up. And he was up for 14 orbits, just under a day. And then every couple of years, they send up some more. 2005, 2008. They did their Gemini equivalent back in 2005 with these 2 guys for 75 orbits. In 2008, a 3-person crew with a spacewalk. So, and then in 2011, they sent up this test vehicle, and they docked with it, but nobody was on board. In 2012, they repeated that experiment and got a crew to dock with it. This was sort of like a space lab sized module, similar to what we flew in the payload bay of the space shuttle. So it, kind of a entry level space station. And they repeated that in 2013. And they're starting to fly females too. So, and in 2016, once again, docked with Tiangong 2. And here you can see their divine vessel docking with the celestial palace here. So, and of course, after they did this, they said, it's a pretty good design for sort of a progress type of craft in which you have a propulsion unit for station keeping and orbit tweaks and some solar panels to keep the electricity alive, and you can pack in some cargo and science and stuff like that. So we're going to make that, and we're going to make that part of the resupply for our space station, sort of like the Progress or uncrewed Dragon flights that are currently going on for ISS. These are the individuals who have flown so far. They've got 34 individuals on the payroll, and they'll be hopefully flying them in the next couple of years as they tinker toy together their space station. Okay, there are a couple people who have flown in space but weren't Chinese citizens, but were born in China. They flew with NASA. So, and got some, their space food looks like our space food from the Gemini and the Apollo eras for the crew MREs. If you've seen the movie by Netflix called Over the Moon, which it talks about a young girl, Fei Fei, and her pet bunny, Bungie. They go off in quest of looking for the mythical Princess of the Moon, and called Chang Ha and U2, or Jade Rabbit. And in the film, they actually, have photos and stuff of the actual program, because the Chinese have decided that, well, just like we had, mythical things like Mercury and Gemini and stuff from mythology. They decided to go with a similar thing. So they're all lunar goddesses. The name of their lunar program. And they first flew a lunar probe back in 2007, and it did imaging and built a really nice lunar map for them. And after they had built their lunar map, they then very responsibly crashed the spacecraft into the moon such that it would provide a navigation hazard in the future. So, of course, they repeated this with better instrumentation and stuff in 2010. But when it was done, instead of crashing the thing, they sent it off to the Earth Sun L2 point behind the moon just to see what was there. And then after checking that out, they went out and did an asteroid flyby. So, repurposing the spacecraft. Of course, Chang 3 was their first lander. They were supposed to land up here, and they missed it by a little bit and landed there. Here's a picture of the lander. And it's still going, at least as near as I can tell from my internet research. There were reports from September of 2020. And of course, here's their rover. So they said, okay, well, we got to do even more. So they decided to do something that nobody else had done yet, and that was land on the far side of the moon. And in order to talk to it, they launched another satellite that orbits the Earth Moon L2 point, the same place where the James Webb Space Telescope will be hanging out. And that way they were able to land in Von Karman crater on the backside of the moon. And here you can see the lander and the rover. And that's still going. It's in the 29th lunar day currently, and it's driven a little over half a kilometer. So. And fun fact, Von Karman was the name of the advisor to their Huset's PhD, and they helped found JPL. So they decided that, we're going to go someplace, make it a bit historically significant. I think it's kind of cool. They did a sample return, launching just last year, and they all landed in early December. Grabbed some soil, some lunar regolith, and sent it back up. It docked with the orbiter they left in lunar orbit, turned to the Earth, and in a little capsule they brought back almost 2 kilograms of soil. And let's see, some fun models here. So they were hoping that the lander would continue operating after the sample return had all up, but unfortunately it did not survive all launch. So, and here is a little sample that's on display in a Beijing museum. Moving on to Mars, we've got Curiosity operating on Mars, we got Insight operating on Mars, we got Perseverance operating on Mars, and soon, in just a couple weeks, the Chinese will be all landing their Mars lander. Here's a photo of the spacecraft on its way to Mars, and it should be a landing somewhere in Utopia, Planitia. I still haven't heard exactly which site they're going for yet. And sometime in May, mid-May is the last I heard. So they had a contest to name the rover, and it turned out that Su Rong, the god of fire, was a winner, and that's partially due to the fact that in Chinese, Mars means a fire star. So it, of course, is doing all sorts of cool rover things. They got imagers and a weather station, ground penetrating radar, sorts of chemical analysis. So all the standard stuff that rovers do these days. And of course, they are doing a commercial space. The Beijing Interstellar Glory Space Technology Limited Corporation, called iSpace, set up their first rocket in 2019. The first 4 stages were solid, and the top stage was a liquid booster, setting up a amateur radio, CubeSat, and some other microsats. And there's lots of other companies, at last count 141 of them, all vying for the thing. So if you have 141 different companies all working on trying to figure out how to do cheap and profitable space, hopefully one of them or more of them will figure it out. They have been raised all sorts of substantial capital. So iSpace, you know, said, yeah, dropping boosters, not a good idea. So we're going to try to do what SpaceX did and land our boosters. So we'll see what happens. There's one scientist whose day job is to do the lunar exploration, said, I want to, you know, do Voyager 1 and 2 types of things and send a Chinese probe out to the heliopause and beyond. I want to be 100 AU away from the Earth when China has its 100th anniversary in 2049. In order to do that, he's got to launch before the end of this decade. And we'll see what happens. If you want to help him, here's his contact info. There is, of course, some political strife. There's what's called the Volpe Amendment, which is sort of tacked onto every single NASA appropriations budget bill that says that NASA is not allowed to spend any of its funds to work with the Chinese. There are loopholes. If you get the FBI to sign off on the collaboration and you notify Congress 30 days beforehand, you can do certain things. Case in point, at the end of March, we traded tracking data with the Chinese as to where our Mars probes are in Martian orbit, so they don't bump into each other. So it's possible, but it's a lot of red tape. In the future, lunar base perhaps. They're going to build a new launch complex in Ningbo City on the coast. It was announced going to cost like $3 billion in new launch complex and manufacturing and command and control. And they hope to get 100 launches per year out of this site. So, but no completion date was announced. We'll see what happens. They of course also said that SpaceX with their Starlink, we could do something similar to that. So they proposed what's called state grid, and it's almost 13,000 satellites in low Earth orbit in different planes and in different altitudes to try to set up a system similar to what Starlink is doing for the internet connectivity. There's lots of firms trying to do similar things here in the U.S. and China and Europe and other countries. So low Earth orbit's going to get real crowded real fast. Of course, they've been working on various things that look like a space shuttle. In September, whoops, sorry about that. Come on. One more time. They did fly something that was air launched. It made orbit, was up for a couple days, then landed at the Lop Nor air base in western China, sort of like our X-37B type of flight. So they aren't talking much about what it did, but it flew. We saw it on the tracking. Here's a quick eye test, just all the other Chinese space shuttle-like projects that have come and gone. But of course, the latest and greatest is their space station. Here you can see the core module and final checkout. It was launched just earlier this week out of China. Very similar to the Russian Soyuz 7 and Mir program that's going to take 11 launches to complete this thing. There's the core module called Harmony of the Heavens. This basically runs from about here to here. And then a logistics cargo tacks onto the back that we talked about earlier. And then in mid-summer, they'll be setting up a crew to help, outfit the structure. So there'll be 2 science modules that'll be tacked onto the sides, and those will be going up sometime in the next 18 months to 2 years. All of the docking stuff for these things, they've got a guidance, optical, and radar for docking at the nose here, but nothing for the sides. So what they do is they dock a module here, and then they've got a robot arm that grabs the module and sort of pulls it around and redocks it here. The Soviets had a similar thing for their space stations. Come on. There we go. So something that looks like this, and yeah, it's very much similar to the Mir space station in its design. So you might remember that, hey, originally Hubble Space Telescope was supposed to be able to be serviced by the ISS, and then that was abandoned when we changed the orbit of ISS to accommodate the Russians. But the Chinese said, yeah, having a space telescope that we can service at their station sounds like a good idea. So they'll be doing that. They hope to be flying in 2024-ish a 2-meter sized primary mirror space telescope. Hubble's a little bit bigger at 2.4 meters, but we'll see what happens. It should have better instrumentation because it's like newer, so tech has gotten better. Here's sort of a skew thing saying, okay, well, you launch this, and then they come down and bring up this module, and then it comes down, bring up. Here's the 2 science modules coming up here. See where all the crews get changed out. So, you in Houston down there can hopefully see this Chinese space station go over your backyards. If you look off to the northwest, pretty much every morning for now for the next couple of weeks. There's a really good pass on May 11th of 83 degrees. That's going to pretty much come down right over Houston, 83 degrees. So I encourage you to research that a little bit more and check it out. This is for a pass. When was it? I think this is for a couple days from now. So, but encourage you to check it out. So, of course, as mentioned before in the space news, they are talking about, the 8th or 9th lunar mission. They'll be going to the South Pole and for exploration and resource utilization. They've signed up a memorandum with the Russians, and they've invited others to join them. So, see what happens at the South Pole. And of course, they've got these cool training camps for kids, sort of like the MDRS facilities. They got 2 of them, just like there's the Flash Line and MDRS facilities. And it looks like they both do similar things, except these are a little bit bigger and nicer and a bit pricier too, for as far as the resources they've tossed at it. So, sort of like Space Camp in Huntsville. So, if you happen to be in China, check it out. I want to thank these individuals who have helped contribute to the content of this, and of course Juan, who started their Chinese crewed space program. So, if you want to read more not related things, there's the 3-body problem about what happens when we are contacted by terrestrials, and who are you loyal to. If you happen to be on Netflix, Wanderers is a kind of interesting sci-fi Chinese-made film. The science in it is kind of like ew, but it looks cool. And of course, Over the Moon by Netflix as well. Sort of a more a fantasy than hard science. But hey, gotta start somewhere. And once again, I want to thank North Houston Space Society for inviting me. Are there questions? And let me see if I can.
Yeah, and if you wouldn't mind, just go ahead and raise your hand so we can kind of maximize people's questions and minimize the kind of people talking on top of each other. Well, thank you, Ben. There was a lot of material to cover. The kind of
Yeah.
interesting story about the head of, or the father of Chinese rocket technology, and kind of how we kind of lost out on the opportunity to have his talents here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sort of like, because we trained them, we exposed them to both the atomic bomb technology and to rocket technology, and then foolishly handed them over to the People's Republic of China. So, and he liked doing it. So it's like, okay, well, um, it all depends upon your point of view, how deep you dig into it. Was he a spy? Was he not a spy? Uh, did he have sympathies and stuff like that? And you could, he is on our record that he didn't want to build a weapons system saying that would harm his countrymen. Um, and at the time, we were targeting both China and the Soviets with our nukes, and of course now we're just targeting. Well, we aren't saying who we're targeting right now, as far as I know. I haven't seen any targeting lists lately, but.
Well, I see David has his hand up. You want to go ahead
Yeah.
and ask your question, David?
Yeah, great presentation. Very interesting, Ben.
you.
Yeah, question for you on the Chinese space station. It looks like it's at about a 41.5 degree
41.48, yeah.
or 48, and
Yeah.
seeing Baikonur at about 46. What's your assessment of the ability for Soyuz from Baikonur to reach that station?
It's going to cost them a lot in fuel to do it. I know that the Russians were trying to twist the arms of the Chinese, saying, can you move up that inclination a little bit more so we can get to it? And actually, they, they're at 45, but they put all of their stuff into a 51 degree inclination, such that their boosters don't fall on Chinese territory. But if you're going to the Chinese space station, they might be willing to look the other way if you drop a booster on them, or maybe iSpace will figure out a way not to drop boosters on their neighbors.
So do you think
so it's either going to be, you really have to have a much bigger rocket in order to get there, or you have to fly out of a, French crew or something like that in order to get there.
So are you hearing anything as to whether they're actually planning on having that diversity and alternate access from the Russians?
I haven't heard anything official. I've heard a lot of people pontificating, sort of like we are doing here, saying, well, maybe, but as far as my understanding, they have agreed to go to the moon together and do a lunar base there, but the invitation has gone out for people to join them on a station, and countries that are also part of ESA have signed up to fly experiments to their station and stuff like that. But it's still pretty much in the preliminary, because everybody was kind of waiting. Well, we'll talk about it after you've proven that there's a place to go. So I would suspect that, after they finish tinker toying together their station with the E11 flights, there'll be a lot more memorandums of understanding signed and stuff like that. So, but until that happens, I'm not going to count on it.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks.
I have
And-
a question. I was just curious that if you have seen Space Force or not, and it's a comedy series. I think it's on Amazon Prime. That is about U.S. Space Force, and they're trying their
Yes.
best to get on the moon and so on. And it shows that Chinese are already there and they have a base over there, and the Americans are trying to get there. Do you think that that is going to really happen or no?
If you're yeah, I know that Netflix had a comedy with Steve Carell. I think that's one that you're talking about, in which it's a good
Yes,
day
yes.
to be black on the moon. But
Yes, exactly. It is a very funny
um,
series.
yeah, it's one of those things that I enjoyed. One of my friends who I watched with um, isn't so deeply steeped in the space lore, so I had to explain. Well, if you look on the walls, those are real astronauts on the walls. And there was a lot of things that they got right, and some things like, no, it really doesn't work that way. But some things were done for derivative for comedy. But yeah, I really it's I really don't until they get their long march. I think 9 or 11 up and running, which they really don't have the heavy lift capability yet, unless they got something buried in a secret base that we haven't, that nobody's talking about. I really don't see them, being able to do that, because in order to just get the Apollo lunar module down to the surface, you needed a Saturn V sized rocket, and that's currently not in their barn right now. So I don't. I mean, if you want to, well, say, well, we grew plants on the moon. The moon is ours, but we'll see. And as I said, hey, they talk a good game, but they don't fund it. They only give them 2 to 3 billion per year, and they fly like up until recently, very much recently, every other year at best, sometimes a year apart. So it's not a whole lot of really rapid progress the way that SpaceX is doing, in which they're having the crash of a month. So we'll see how we'll see how the next one works out. But
Yeah. Ben.
Yeah.
I did the speech on or talk on the 7 halo orbits for returning to the moon. The expectation is that China will probably build a gateway between 2024 and 2028, and we suspect they'll choose the frozen lunar orbit. So you might want to keep your ears open for that.
Okay. I mean, it's my understanding you do the halos because your booster isn't big enough to do it all in one throw. So, but I really am much more of a fan of big rockets do it all in a one throw, a lot less.
Well, NASA's going to do the NRO.
Yeah.
The near rectilinear orbit, and there's even some talk about SpaceX and Blue Origin choosing the prograde circular orbit. That's the next best one. So,
we'll see.
So the moon could get crowded real fast later on this decade.
Well, the moon is as much surface area, I think, as we have in Africa. So there's room.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a lot of information on China. Thank you.
Yeah, and I apologize for not editing it down a bit more, but there's lots of cool stuff, and of course you always have access to the YouTube afterwards as well as the PowerPoint. So if you really want to delve into it,
And I'll try to make all those links, list them out so people can easily get to them too. Charles is on chat, and he says he doesn't have a microphone and camera, so he can't ask a question, but he was wondering, has China actually demonstrated a remote manipulator arm system that they're going to use to actually move those modules around? Will this be net new technology, or have they have any experience with that?
There is some things, just like was mentioned earlier in the space news, the concept of going up to an existing satellite and grabbing onto it and either helping it out or doing nefarious things, depending upon where your allegiances lie, have been demonstrated by the Chinese out at Geosync. So robot arms and robot arms, have been around a fair length of time. I mean, yeah, Canada is a leader in the field, but there's not that much. I mean, there's certain things you got to keep in mind. Certain basic things of like, yeah, you got to keep your motors warm, and and structures and mass, and you got to start mass and stop mass. But it's not. I really don't see that being a show stopper. It's if you watch their promo videos, they've got little animations of the little astronaut riding out at the end of their end effector riding around, and also you just grab a module, plug and play. So I really don't see it, because they're going like 10 feet, so it's not,
I know, especially
And-
considering all their manufacturing technology using robotics, it seems like they would
Yeah.
have
I mean,
easily the skill.
I have in my basement a little Chinese-made robot that prints little spaceships like this. So I figure if they can do that, they should be able to do, move an object the size of a bus, 10 feet into a new parking spot. I really don't see it as, that big of a technological leap, knowing what they currently are doing. So.
Oh, well, did anybody else have another question or? And then, Ben, we can send him questions if we have any that come up afterwards, for
Oh,
sure.
yeah, I'm on Facebook, and Nathan definitely knows how to reach me. And here's another thing that was printed by my Chinese robot in the basement. So it's like, they can do this. I'm, not too worried about it.
That is awesome.
So, yeah, I mean, I really appreciate, because I mean, even now it's hard to walk into a store. You can't walk into a toy store and buy a model of ISS. It's really, and I wouldn't, I would have hoped that, there would be Dragon spaceship models you could buy and stuff like that. But there isn't, so I had to go buy a robot to print them for me. It's like, okay, whatever. And now I'm trying to find the plans for the Chinese space station model. I'm hoping to find that really soon, which I can have one of those, because I do have a 1:144 ISS model that came from China back in the 90s and marketed through Intermountain Railroad. But
Talking about models, I can't help but notice, Adam, the new Shepherd model behind you. By the way, it's great to see you here, but I was just looking on the website and you can't seem to buy it. They have a stress reliever ball, but that looks really cool.
there are new Shepherd models on a Thingiverse, so if you
Oh my goodness, you have a new Glenn also, huh?
Yeah, I got both the models here, and they come apart. So you have the different stages of New Glenn.
Did you have to print that yourself, or did you get them from someplace?
This is through the company, so
Okay.
only Blue Origin employees are allowed to get them right now. And then the new Shepherd capsule comes on top. You have the mannequin that was in there for the flights and all that.
cool.
Oh, does it have like a magnetic attachment? It sounded like it kind of clumped in there.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat. Whenever we meet in person again, maybe we could convince you to make the drive back to Houston and show us.
I come back to Houston about every 2 months. So
That'd be awesome.
So yeah, whenever y'all come back in person, I'll go and make a meeting.
It'd be fantastic. Yeah. And Gary, good to see you too. Thanks for dialing in.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear these talks, and I was especially keen on hearing what the Chinese are up to. So, want to thank the speaker for that.
Yeah, you know, he thought he had a presentation ready to go a few weeks ago, but they kept coming out with stuff. You got to keep updating it. It's a
That's hard
big
to keep up.
challenge. Well, I guess we're just about at time. If y'all don't mind, I'd like to take a group picture. Would everybody be willing to turn on their camera? And maybe I could just take a quick snapshot?